Hey retro gamers, today on Smashing Bricks, we play a tabletop RPG, but this time on our desktop PC. The year, my friends, is 1998, and the game is BioWare's Baldur's Gate. God, so stupid. Hey, welcome back to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast. This is episode 39. My name is Eddie Inzauto, and today I'm joined once again by returning guest and OG member of the Cane and Rinse podcast, James Carter. Hey, James, how's it going?
If none are better. I heard that so many times in this game, I can't even tell you. Oh dear.
God.
I am doing not bad at all, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm a terrible singer, as we just learned, because I just got
You
over
are an
a
amazing
cold.
singer. If I'd sung that, we'd be redoing it.
It was one take. Everyone should know it was one take. But yeah, so we're playing. What are we playing? We're playing Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition in computer form. That's what we played, right?
We did. Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Trying to tell anyone, ask Google, just speak about this game at all is a little bit of a problem, because you type Baldur's Gate and everyone or say Baldur's Gate, everyone assumes 3. Just assumes a 3 on the end of it. And
there's been a really popular Baldur's Gate released recently. If nobody
it turns
knew that.
out, yeah. It's entirely justified that game gets all the plaudits it does, but it does make it a little bit difficult when you have to kind of put in the enhanced qualifier whenever you're Googling anything to make sure
that
you
usually
get
does it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, we played Baldur's Gate, which was a 1998 Windows fantasy RPG, a CRPG from the 90s. It was a popular genre, right? Around that time, we had a bunch of these types of games with this isometric view and a lot of clicking around. And in this particular case, it was built directly from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, aka Dungeons and Dragons version 2. So much so that you could say that it is simply a digital implementation of D&D, because it has all the rules incorporated into the game, even when those might not be ideal for a video game.
Even when THACO doesn't make a huge amount of sense straight off the bat.
See, I played Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. I played a little bit of 2nd edition and then jumped immediately to the incredibly superior 3rd edition and 3.5 specifically. Dear God, what an improvement. Anyway, so yeah, this was December 21st, 1998 in the United States, in North America, January 99 in Japan and the EU. So basically, you're going to be walking around individual areas that are like a giant square on your screen, and you click through the fog of war to explore wherever you are, whether it's a town or the wilderness or the road or whatever. And when you get to the edge of those areas, whatever you have done within those areas, whether it be fighting or talking or resting or shopping at the shop or going to the temple or whatever it is, you get to the edge of one of those areas and you click off. You end up on the world map, which is a nice abstraction of the Sword Coast of the Forgotten Realms, and you click on an adjacent area that becomes available to you, and now you can travel to that area. And you're going on this journey which is essentially a chosen one story. You're this orphan who has no idea why people are trying to kill you, and your father figure, Gorion, says we got to get out of here, and then he immediately gets killed. So you have no idea why you're important or what you're doing. So you just go ahead to the next area, and on the way, you get a lot of quests if you want or not, and you do a lot of combat, presumably if you want. And it's a real time combat that you can pause. Maybe I didn't describe it super well. Is there any other way that you would talk about this game at a high level to give people an idea of what they're looking at? Maybe referencing something else, or if need be.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in many ways, this does look like a tactics or strategy game in terms of kind of isometric viewpoint. That would generally be top down, but you can zoom in and out quite a bit. So you can sort of take in a reasonably large amount of the map. You can kind of zoom right out and see how much of any part of the map you've uncovered. And you can zoom right into pretty close up where you can see what your characters are doing and what's going on the screen. So it has that aspect of like a 90s strategy game or tactics game. And then, yeah, a lot of sort of point and click in terms of moving around the screen, in terms of interacting with items, in terms of interacting with characters. You said you've kind of got the option of doing side quests and the options of combat, but in a lot of cases, those are going to kind of pop up almost seemingly randomly in front of you and be presented to you. And then you can back away from them or kind of engage if you want to.
Yeah, that's true. You get accosted a lot in this game, whether in a friendly way or an aggressive
exactly. way. And some of the NPCs will beeline for you when they see you. You can see them sort of zigzagging their way across the map around obstacles to get to you.
And you're like, oh, that guy's coming to talk to me for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is nice in a way because it means you're not. I think the thing with sort of isometric point and click can be often player character pathing. And being able to see behind objects that are on the map that sometimes you're moving behind and you're kind of out of sight for a second, so it can be a little bit of a strange task to navigate around the map. I think this does a pretty good job, but sometimes it was very much the case of walk into an inn or something and you can see someone's coming over to you and it's just like, right, I'm going to stay here rather than try and get to them any quicker, just because it's easier.
Let them come to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that speaks also to the pause that you mentioned in the real time with pause combat. So it's not fully real time in that you can pause and queue up actions and deal with inventory and that kind of thing whilst pause, set heals to happen, that kind of stuff. But it certainly is real time versus turn based. It's not your go, their go. You know, you're queuing up your actions and pausing just allows you to kind of catch a breath when things start going wrong or you just need to work out what you're doing. You know, shuffle characters around.
Yeah, and I think it's that sort of real time with pause combat, and perhaps the depth of the RPG character cut. Well, maybe not. I was going to say that separates it from Diablo. Like, what does separate this from a Diablo? I would say it's the pace, if nothing
absolutely.
else, right?
Yeah. This is for most of its 50 potentially hours, well, potentially hundreds, but probably in the tens of hours, dozens of hours. It's a slow game. You're going to be reading a lot. You're going to be stopping to sort out inventory, to sell goods, to review what shops have in store to buy, etc. It's got so much in-game text and lore to read through that you don't have to, but even if you're just reading the dialogue, Some of it is voiced, but not much. There's a lot of reading to be done there to take that in. Your responses, you get verbatim responses on the screen in front of you, so you're reading through those to make sure you know what it is you're going to say when it comes to responding to a question or a threat or whatever it might be.
Mm.
So yeah, it is really in depth in that way. It's not meant to be an action game first and foremost. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Right down to the point where in combat you will set your characters to attack someone, they will be attacking you, and you will see 6, 8, 10, sometimes 12 characters all on screen, all swatting at one another, and nothing is happening. No one's losing health. It's just a screen of text down the bottom telling you that, oh, they dodged. Oh, you missed. Oh, it's just, okay, we're just standing here for a good 15 seconds sometimes, and no one is hitting anything. Which, to be fair, from what I've never played D&D tabletop, but I have seen a few sort of recorded sessions on YouTube, various people who put their games online for people to watch, and it can be a bit like that. You know, someone has to roll. Okay, you've rolled. Now roll for your damage. That damage wasn't enough to actually hit them. You know, it's absorbed by their armor, etc. So there can be a bit of that where you go a full round the table and kind of nothing happens. Not nothing happens because, you know, you've tried to attack and missed. So, you know, that happened. But in terms of your start and finish position, you've kind of finished everyone's turns where they started, and you can see that. Seeing that visually on screen is quite amusing, really, when you start to think about equate it to the tabletop RPG game in that way.
Yeah, tabletop RPG in video game form. All right, so moving on. Did you play this originally in the 90s or later in the 2000s, or was this the first time? What's the deal with your prior relationship with this game?
Trying to think, 1998. I was definitely PC gaming at that point. I'd had a Super Nintendo beforehand, but I'd moved over to PC gaming. But it was Championship Manager at the time. Now that would be Football Manager, which similar to this in a way, in which you're doing a lot of reading what's happening on the screen and not a lot of seeing what's happening necessarily. SimCity, Doom, of course, Quake and the like, but never got round to any of these at all. All of the sort of, I guess there's half a dozen, maybe 8, maybe a couple more than that, of these that came out in a sort of 5 to maybe 10-year period.
In a
Baldur's
flurry.
Gate yeah, absolutely in a flurry. Yeah, completely. It's a weird one where it feels like CRPGs are very much kind of a throwback to 20 to 30 years ago, but they kind of never really went away because these games have lived so long in the memory of people who played them. It just wasn't something that I came to at all until actually we played Planescape Torment for Cane and Rinse. And then last year or the year before, played Torment Tides of Numenera, which is the spiritual successor to Planescape Torment. So those two games are really my only experience of CRPGs in this kind of lineage.
Right.
And Baldur's Gate definitely was aware of. Didn't play the two CRPGs. Didn't play the Dark Alliance kind of action games that came out on consoles in the mid 2000s, I believe. Haven't played those, but it's just one of those series that even before 3 came out, it kind of loomed, I guess is the way to put it, over modern RPGs. I think something like Dragon Age Origins, I played a couple of hours at the beginning of, and I think that was very much seen as championing this sort of game until something like Baldur's Gate 3 came out. But Baldur's Gate was always kind of the series you heard about when you heard about these sorts of games. And so it's one I've been keen to play for a while. So when it popped up on your list of games you were looking at covering, I was happy to put myself forward for it, I have to say.
Nice. Yeah, and you definitely see that sort of lineage continuing through gaming, and Dragon Age was one that stuck out to me as almost like the generational leap from Super Mario World to Super Mario 64. It was like from all these classic CRPGs to Dragon Age Origins, something like that.
Yeah, it was very much BioWare coming back to the fantasy CRPG, wasn't it? Because they'd
Yeah.
sort of made steps with Knights of the Old Republic and then Mass Effect, certainly into
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi, but with Mass Effect almost into more of that sort of Western RPG style rather than isometric perspective, slow-paced, turn-based or pause combat that something like a Dragon Age tried to capture a bit more directly, I think it's fair to say.
Mm-hmm. And yet, for my experience, I
Mm,
definitely had a lot more of the RPG experience with the 3D era games, like we were just saying, KOTORs and
yeah,
the Mass Effects and the Dragon Ages, and then the
yeah,
Bethesda games like Oblivion and Skyrim and Fallouts and all that. As far as this game, no experience in the 90s, no experience, period. I played Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance on PS2 in
mhm,
2001. That was from Snowblind Studios, and that was basically more of a Diablo. You mentioned it. You said it was more action based, and it definitely
yeah,
was an ARPG. It was also based on third edition. I don't know how it really came through in the gameplay because it was just so fast paced, it didn't really matter. But it
yeah,
was a totally different sort of game engine, I guess. My first BioWare game was actually KOTOR, yeah, in 2003. And I played, related to these CRPGs, I played Fallout 2 in the 2000s. I never played Fallout 1, I don't think. And I played Fallout 2 kind of more than 5 years, less than 10 years after this game came out, somewhere in there. I didn't really play a lot of PC games at this time because it was still early, in my opinion, for getting PCs, and we didn't have like the microcomputers and stuff like you guys had over there. So my first PC
yeah,
had to be like the full on tower and everything.
yeah,
Um, and what I did play when first getting my first computer was I played a few FPSs, and there was the sort of RTS emergence in the early 90s, and I played some of those like Command and Conquer and
yeah,
Warcraft and stuff. And I think that's important to the history of RPGs also,
mhm,
because to lay the foundation here of the state of gaming, RPGs had kind of like Western RPGs specifically and computer RPGs specifically, they had sort of fizzled a little bit in the early 90s. And Diablo and Fallout revitalized the genre in
mhm,
1997, whereas prior to that, RTS games had been emerging with Dune 2 in 1992. Then we had the first Warcraft, a couple of Command and Conquer games. And JRPGs were in like a full on golden age prior to all
yeah,
these Western RPGs coming out. Because you had all the stuff in the 16-bit era, a bunch hitting 32-bit consoles. So the RPG landscape was about to kind of shift, specifically with Fallout. Then Fallout 2 and this came out in 1998 within 2 months of each
mm,
other. Following this, we then got Planescape Torment the next year, Icewind Dale and Baldur's Gate 2 the next year, and a few of the others. Then they had the new engine, they went to Neverwinter Nights, blah, blah, blah. And a bunch of other ones that weren't even like in the direct lineage of these games, but were
yeah,
closely related in the style and presentation.
yeah,
It's been a pretty consistent genre since then, even moving alongside the more 3D games. And even much more recently, a game that made huge waves in kind of the modern gaming landscape was Disco Elysium, right? This
yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
falls into
absolutely.
this realm a
Oh,
little bit. Still,
completely,
it's different,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
But it's
yeah, yeah, no,
still right there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and in terms of, that's a game that was developed kind of as, yeah, point and click isometric aspect. Yeah, it's not fantasy, but they adapt aspects of this kind of game into that world in a way that if you've played games like this you'll recognize, and otherwise would just seem like great game design in that game. And also, I think it's worth saying that a really interesting series that we would end up talking about at some point anyway is the Witcher games,
Mm-hmm.
because I think people, when they think of The Witcher, think of Witcher 3. That's the
Mm-hmm.
one I have played through. It's one that plays not really amazingly as an action game, but it definitely plays more like a direct third person, direct control over player character, third person action game. But it comes from Witcher 1 and 2, and I think it speaks to kind of what you're talking about there, where there's these growing pains with this kind of genre where it feels like they always keep coming back to what these games, what Fallout, the original Fallout games did with the isometric aspect, the sort of slow, deliberate pace kind of thing. And then there's these growing pains in all different directions. I think Dragon Age, we've seen some of that. I think Witcher, we've seen some of that, where Witcher 1 and 2, very few people recommend going back to because they're quite clunky games.
I tried
I
it.
think, yeah, I played just an hour or two of the beginning of each.
I bounced right off Witcher 1 and 2.
Yeah, exactly. And The Witcher 3 is kind of the one that people say, actually, that one you can hand on heart say plays well. And I would tend to agree. I think most people who are kind of used to fantasy third person action could get their head around that. But looking back to Witcher 1 and 2, there is that sort of clunky middle ground of how do we still make this a series that calls back to the fantasy CRPGs of the day, but doesn't require someone to be sat in front of a computer screen with a mouse clicking. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that doesn't always translate great onto controllers. For example, this game, I mentioned it had been ported over to consoles. A big thing with that is going to be how well you take to having a controller setup, which is strange to play this game. I'm trying to think back, because I played Planescape Torment that way on Switch of all things, and it's a lot of radial menus, as you might expect.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a number bar that you can hotkey to. You don't have 30, 40 keys in front of you that you can kind of potentially rebind different things to. So pausing is great, that helps a lot, but it's a lot of radial menus and radial menus within radial menus and that kind of thing, just because you've got so much stuff to kind of stack. And rather than make it really onerous, they've tried to kind of smooth that out in the same way that something like a Mass Effect did when it first came out. And I think people tend to think, again, a bit like The Witcher, people think of Mass Effect 2 and 3 when they think of Mass Effect, and 1 was much more that, not halfway house, it was most of the way there, but it was experiencing some of those growing pains of how do we take something that is so built from tabletop to go onto a PC mouse and keyboard input environment. And I think that fits well on a touch device, but it doesn't necessarily fit well with a controller that is by and large made for navigating 2D, 3D environments in a more action style. So it is really interesting to see the kind of growing pains that CRPGs have gone through in becoming BioWare's later games, Bethesda's RPGs, The Witcher, that kind of stuff. But when these games came out, you could probably argue for a while there, CRPGs were the only Western RPGs,
Mm-hmm.
and then they started. KOTOR would probably be a great example of something that started diversifying from that.
Yeah. And then, well, before these CRPG style games, you had more of Western RPGs looking like Wizardry and Ultima with the first person dungeon crawling.
Sure,
Going through
yeah,
there. That was like
yeah,
the late 80s, very early 90s, that sort of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay, so about this game a little bit more, real quick. Began development in 1995, had a budget of $1 million, roughly, and just to hammer home the D&D connection, the original title was Forgotten Realms, which is a location in the Dungeons and Dragons lore, which is immense, by the way. There are hundreds of D&D books at this point, and the main programmer, Scott Grieg, apparently read all of the Forgotten Realms books in existence to get ready for making this game, which is commendable, I would say. But that also hammers home like just how committed they were to bringing a faithful video game translation of a tabletop RPG to the computer.
I feel like once he got through a quarter of those books, he probably got the gist, didn't he? You think there was much from the back sort of 75%, 80% of the books he read that really changed the way he approached this game.
Yeah, it's like he got
at
the
a certain
point.
Yeah, at a certain point that feels like a badge of honor for himself rather than necessary for the
Probably
for
just
the
so he could
development
say
of
it.
the game.
Just so
Yeah,
a
yeah, absolutely.
podcast 30 years later could say, and the guy who programmed this read all the books, so you know it's good. He listens to every podcast and he's like, that's right, damn right, I read those books.
That's right, you best mention this.
They developed a new engine for this, the Infinity engine. Oh, by the way, this was only their second video game.
Yeah.
I believe many of these BioWare people, it's called BioWare because they were medical professionals who transitioned over to video games. And actually, they at first made applications for the medical field that were essentially like video game programs. But they switched over. They made, what did they make? Shattered Steel. And then they made Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, and Shattered Steel, I seem to remember, was a first-person mech game.
Yeah.
So completely different. This was just them taking a stab at something they wanted to do as gamers, as tabletop gamers, as fans of D&D. They wanted the challenge of putting this rule set into a video game engine must be so thrilling for programmers and the producers involved in this game.
And it really locked in what BioWare was all about for like the rest of forever. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then they used the engine for Planescape and Icewind Dale 1 and 2, Baldur's Gate 2, probably some other stuff also.
Neverwinter, I imagine, but I'm not 100% sure.
That was the
on
next
that,
engine. They had the Aurora engine that added three-dimensional characters and environments, I think. So it was essentially the Infinity engine upgraded.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's a matter of opinion whether it's an upgrade. I think some people say it's not as good. I haven't played those games. But that was basically still an evolution of the Infinity engine.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, they look the same if you just glance at them without
that's
zooming in and paying attention. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And just like Fallout before it, Baldur's Gate was inspired by Interplay's earlier Wasteland, although that game looks very different. If you play it now, you'll see it looks maybe some more like those older Ultima style games, that sort of thing, very rudimentary. But it was more about like using the world to solve your problems in different ways, whatever. This game took a long time to make. They did not use tiles in their graphical design as most games were doing at this time. So in a lot of these old games, you'll see just repeated textures, repeated tiles to make up the world. But in this game, every area, which is limited to the square of that town or that wilderness or whatever, as I was saying before, but everything there was drawn out. Every little piece was made bespoke for that area. And it looks nice. And it took them a long time to make.
Yeah, I bet, because these are not small areas, even by today's standards, really. To zoom out and look at them, you would think, oh, that's not a massive map. But given the speed at which you're walking around
at
the map,
0 miles per hour, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason I often chuckle about something like Grand Theft Auto, where at times it barely feels worth getting in a car because you're running or swimming so fast compared to what you would actually manage as a human being in a city
Oh,
that
yeah, that's
size.
true.
They compress the size of this. They boast about the size of the cities they make, and then make the character run twice as fast as a human can run to
Hmm.
allow you to get around it quicker. It's like, well, make it smaller then. I don't know. It feels like you don't need to do this. Then you're one or the other. Don't make
Yeah,
it
what
bigger
are you
and make
trying
the
to
character run
achieve?
faster, because that
Yeah.
doesn't really seem to fit. But
Hmm. Some of the people behind this game were designer James Olin, programmer Scott Krieg, I mentioned, the artist John Gallagher, who did all those maps, composer Michael Honing, and producer Ray Muzica. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I hope it's right.
I think
And
that's yeah,
they
that's right.
were surprised by the success of this game, which was reportedly Interplay's fastest seller ever at that point. Interplay was the publisher, BioWare was the developer, if I didn't mention that earlier. And it was actually Black Isle Studio, which is like a division of Interplay, was the publisher at first, and then maybe it was published under the Interplay brand late. I don't know, but that's just the way the company was structured. Sold about 1 million copies in that first year, 2.2 in the first 4 years, and 3.8 million by 2015 if you include the million that the enhanced edition sold, which is solid for what many would call a niche game. It got a port for the Mac OS in July 2000, and as you said, that one from Beamdog, developed by Overhaul Games in 2012. Oh, and one thing that you sort of mentioned, but I want to highlight is that, while it had the whole different control scheme because it was made for the controller, that they actually didn't put in the Steam version, weirdly, even though it's the enhanced
Yeah,
edition on Steam, it's the enhanced edition on the Switch, and it's the enhanced edition on the PS5, whatever it is, 3, 4.
four. Yeah,
They didn't put the controller support on the Steam version. And I think that while maybe the radial menus are difficult to navigate for some people, I think that direct movement has got to be a godsend. To just
yeah.
be able to move your left joystick and walk around, I would love
Yeah.
that. I did not get the chance to do that.
It's worth noting that on consoles, anyone who's played a console game in the last sort of 10 years will know that feeling of having to navigate a menu using a stick and having a mouse cursor on the screen. The Destiny effect, essentially. That would be what playing this game on controller would be like if they hadn't put direct control in. That fine control you get with a mouse, it doesn't really work on a controller stick in the same way. So putting in direct control is an absolute must.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving a cursor around with a joystick is like kill myself territory. That's how much I enjoy doing that.
I'd rather do it with the touchpad on a PlayStation 5 controller, something like that
Yeah.
would make much more sense.
Yeah. So that's the enhanced edition. We also had an expansion. Tales of the Sword Coast came out a year after the original. And then, as we said, the sequel came a year after that. It was received really well, got a bunch of awards. It was the PC role playing game of the year from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences in the second annual awards. And IGN, Computer Games, and RPG Vault all gave it the full on game of the year that year. And then at least 9 other publications gave it a PC role playing game award that year.
And this was not an easy year to think about this game winning
98
game
was
of the year.
solid. Yeah.
98 was
Ocarina
those
of
games that
Time.
people look back to exactly. 98 was one of the maybe best years in all gaming.
Oh, that's funny. You've
Yeah.
only been on the show for 1998 games.
That's true. Ocarina of Time. We had what else am I thinking of? Metal Gear Solid. 98 was Half-Life, right? Original Half-Life. But it's one of those years in gaming. It's ludicrous. What have we got here? Banjo-Kazooie, Metal Gear Solid, Baldur's Gate, StarCraft, Fallout 2, Ocarina of Time, Half-Life, Resident Evil 2. It's ludicrous this year in gaming. It really
Yeah.
is.
An intense year. And as we said, it got some of those game of the year, not just RPG game of the years, but full
Yeah.
on. So that's good praise. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the original game had a game rankings average of 92% with a bunch of 9 plus ratings from all the big publications of the time. The enhanced edition got no awards and mixed reviews with a Metacritic average of 78 out of 100. So to me, that suggests that people think the design has aged in the intervening years. What was revolutionary potentially at the time, now in 2012, reviewers were seeing as something other than revolutionary.
One of the complaints that I had with Planescape Torment on Switch was I ran into a game-ending bug. That bug was known about from the original version of the game when that came out, and it just wasn't sorted, wasn't dealt with, and was still there, and you could just wander into that. And so I think there's a certain amount of people actually appreciated the fidelity with which those ports happened, and the enhanced edition made a lot of quality of life improvements, as I understand it. I only played the enhanced edition, so I don't have that point of comparison. And the overwhelming sort of sense seemed to be this is so clearly the way to play the game unless you have particular nostalgia for the original art and kind of cutscenes over the new ones. It just kind of replaced the original game as this is now the way to play. But didn't really do anything else. And by that point, by 2012, and certainly by 2017, 18, when these ports started coming out, there were so many other CRPGs that were more modern, that had a lot of more modern conveniences and quality of life changes that you could recommend that someone go and play instead. And so I think it was tough to kind of pitch these 10, 20 years after they originally came out as something to go back to instead of. So, it's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? But yeah, I wonder if maybe some of it is that it kind of has been surpassed by BioWare themselves, by Baldur's Gate in terms of that franchise itself. As you mentioned, Disco Elysium's really modernized this kind of game in an interesting way that is the thing that's grabbing headlines nowadays in the CRPG space. So.
And we have to realize that these are different people, even at the same publications, different gamers reviewing the same game. Maybe they're different kinds of gamers, right? Maybe they're not the kinds of gamers who appreciate this kind of design at that time. Which brings it to us, right? Because we just played it 2025, beginning of the year. So what did we think about it? We played it. You said you played on PC the enhanced edition, which is exactly what I did, because going and getting the old game would probably require like busting out an old computer for it to run on natively or something. Getting a disc.
So the only way I would go about doing that if I didn't have to run it on an old computer with an original disc would be going to GOG.com, and GOG.com have the enhanced editions. So they, as far as I'm aware, they don't separately have the original editions. They're usually good for getting older games running on modern hardware.
So if they don't have it, nobody has
robust way. Yeah. So yeah, I ended up playing it on GOG. I didn't run into, I don't think, any bugs. I was incredibly surprised how quickly the game loaded. And this is a game where you are quick saving, and if you're like me, quick loading quite a bit. And
idea.
if I'd quick saved and then something went wrong and I wanted to load, it was a literal press of the L key, and the game, before I'd lifted my finger off the L key, had reloaded. It was lightning fast. If I was fast traveling, by the time I'd clicked on travel, and moved my mouse back to the middle of the screen, I was already loaded into the new area. It is so quick. And actually, you could sort of say, well, yeah, older game, maybe you would expect that, but this is not a small game by any means. And tracking the location of items, if you sell an item to a vendor and then realize you actually needed it for a quest, which is something that's easy to do because it doesn't tell you which items you need for quests, it doesn't flag them or lock them into your inventory or anything. It kind of leaves the player to make those sorts of mistakes. You can go back to that vendor and they will still have that item for sale that you sold to them 20, 30, 40 hours previously. So it tracks what's where, who's got what, that kind of thing. And it doesn't need to load that every time if you're not in the right area. It doesn't need to load that. But the performance I was really, really impressed by. I don't think I ran into any slowdown, any issues, anything, no crashes, anything like that, which was really nice.
Oh, that's great. I didn't really have any big things. It was a little buggy
Mm.
in certain ways for me. Like I felt like I always had to click on things like 2, 3, 4 times for it to like understand that I was clicking that button or that
Oh, okay.
or that stairway or that door. And
Yeah.
a couple times I just kind of teleported. Like I talked to someone who was supposed to bring me somewhere and then nothing happened. So I just started walking around and all of a sudden it cut to the new indoor scene from the outdoor where I was. But that's fine. That's not a big deal. Nothing crazy. But I have a question for you before I guess we get into like more of the
Yeah.
nitty gritty of how we felt about playing the game. How did you go about learning to play this game? Did you read the 164-page instruction manual? Did you do the tutorial? Did you click around to figure things out slowly? Tell me about that process. Or did you bring knowledge from Planescape Torment, maybe?
A little bit. I guess that gets me over the hump of how to navigate the space and that kind of thing, and understanding, the pace of the game, certainly. So I wasn't put off by how slow it was to kind of get going and get moving. And not scared of taking my time as well, because that's the other thing. Realizing that it probably is worth talking to most people. You'll kind of get a feel for if it just says commoner, maybe they're not going to have anything interesting to say. Not because they're a commoner, not making some kind of class argument here, but just because they're
Oh
designated
boy.
as a.
Hey, now's the time to make arguments like that for the billionaire class because that
For
seems to
sure,
be like
yeah,
the cool thing to do.
absolutely. Well, you know me, I'm going to jump on board with the billionaire class only if I can sink that boat. Um, but yeah, they kind of tend to. There's a difference between named characters, NPCs, enemies, etc., and more generic ones. So you kind of get a feel for, okay, this person is a named character. I'm probably going to want to talk to them. Maybe they'll have a quest or an item or a piece of lore for me, etc. But you can talk to everyone. You can't interact with everything. But having the tab key as the kind of toggle for being able to see what's interactable, that's a nice change that. So I believe wasn't in the original game, was in Baldur's Gate 2, and then got ported into Baldur's Gate in the enhanced edition. I think that was a change that happened, or at least not, at least for some secret hidden other items. So everything that's interactable now is highlighted on screen, and that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, that's an option. You can turn that on or off. Because at first it was off for me.
Yeah, that's the other thing, how customizable that is in the menu. Even once you've selected your difficulty level, there's a lot of options for selecting how the game's going to behave,
Yeah,
whether
I really like
characters
that.
are going to automatically reach max health on a successful rest, for example, which just cuts out stuff like having to rest, heal everyone, rest again to get all your heals back, that kind of thing. And by the end of the game, you can be going through cycles of that to make sure everyone gets up to full health. It can get really tiresome, so just having the ability just to rest and restore full health, even if you're playing on a higher difficulty level, which I wasn't, but, hypothetically.
What difficulty level were you playing on? And did you change halfway through by chance?
So, no, I didn't, because I made the decision early to go low, to set my expectations low for what I would be capable of doing in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I was playing under a time limit, necessarily, because at the time I started playing, we hadn't decided exactly when we were going to record. But I know that if I'm playing for a podcast recording, the last thing I want is to be down to the wire, having to drop difficulty to speed up my gameplay. So I decided I went for normal. So I guess normal's a weird one because core rules kind of feels like that's normal, and then normal's the one below that.
Right.
But so that feeds into how I went about playing this game, which was Google search for recommendations for when starting. I figure with these games, forewarned is forearmed, on the basis that the game's going to surprise me anyway, because it's going to throw side missions, characters, mechanics at me that are going to be interesting. But when it comes to the basic part of the game, I don't want to make a decision on moment one that is going to prevent or hamper or severely negatively impact my game 20 hours down the line. I don't know about it. So
You want to
watch
have
a
the
couple
best
of videos.
experience. Yeah.
To a certain extent, yeah, and I'm not wedded to the idea of always needing to save scum to get the best results. But something I found quite interesting was I watched like couple of guide videos, read a couple of written guides, and then I watched the opening half hour of someone's playthrough, in which they said they were playing core rules because they didn't like the idea of always getting max rolls on hit points or that kind of thing, and then promptly watched them start save scumming to remember spells. And I was like, so you're playing core rules.
So you're playing story mode, just you're doing it manually.
But it's this weird thing of, and perfectly fine. I play stealth games like that. If I make a mistake in a stealth game, I'm much less likely to roll with it and much more likely to say, I can do that better, reload, and go back and try and do it again. To some people, that's not playing the spirit of the game. To me, that's me choosing how I'm going to play. And so this is not me having a go at someone, saving the game, reloading to get the result they want from a conversation, a dice roll, a combat scenario, whatever it might be. But in this game on core rules, for example, when you level up a character, the number of hit points you are going to add to their total varies. It's based on a dice roll. When you attack someone, there's a dice roll there that specifies how much damage you're going to do. In terms of whether you successfully unlock a chest, that's a dice roll. Whether you are able to detect a trap, that's everything's a dice roll. And one of the examples is when you get a spell in your inventory, you pass it to a mage, and they have the ability to try and decipher it and add it to their spell book. And that's a dice roll. And it's a 50-50 dice roll, or it looks like 50-50. The outcome is either, yes, it was written, no, it fails. And normal, that succeeds all the time. You always roll maximum hit points on a character level up, and those sorts of things. It smooths that stuff out and just says, we're just going to assume you get, in these couple of instances, not every roll in combat, not every roll in other aspects of the game, but in certain instances, we're just going to assume you got max. And core rules doesn't. Enemies hit a little bit harder, and you deal a little bit less damage and stuff. But yeah, you could roll a 1, and that's the amount of hit points you've added to your character. It's slightly more complex than that, but you could. And so from the start of the game onwards, when you're rolling the number of points that you have for your character build, that's a dice roll as well. And so you would see people re-roll to make sure they get something that's in the high 80s or 90s as their character roll. And it's just, that struck me as, well, if people are going to play core rules but then re-roll a bunch of times, can I just skip to the point where I get the roll I wanted and not do all of the re-rolling a bunch of times in between?
Yeah.
So I opted for normal on that basis.
And I started with normal also because I just read the descriptions of each one and I was like, I don't like the sound of that. I don't like the sound of that. All right, let's do normal. That's fine. Still on normal, you can fight an enemy and just be standing there for like an hour, nobody hitting anybody. And you're just like, okay, well, I clicked him once. I'll just sit here and watch until he hits me or I hit him.
Yeah,
maybe I'll get a sandwich.
Roll damage rolls on combat or anything like that. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So I ended up turning it down even further. I went down to easy, and
Okay.
then
Yeah.
I even clicked on story mode for a
Hmm.
bit when I got aggravated by something happened. I just like died a bunch of times in the same
Yeah.
area, and I was like, let me just story mode this because I determined at a certain point that I did not enjoy the combat arc
Okay.
really at all.
Hmm.
So what did you think of the combat since we're
Yeah. Yeah.
there?
It's a really weird one. So randomness in games is at times a little bit of a hot topic. XCOM is the game that kind of always comes up. Of is it satisfying to have an enemy stood literally right on the end of your shotgun, pull the trigger, and have it miss? Is that satisfying in games? Does it add to excitement? Because the idea is it should add to the excitement. I don't know if this is going to work. I'm going to try it. But when it's something that feels like that should be 100% guaranteed or should be 50-50 and you're not seeing it come through 50% of the time, it feels like it fails more often than it should. That becomes a problem. It becomes frustrating. And that's where this kind of combat can get frustrating. In this case, I think it's not hands-off combat. That's the wrong way to say it, but it's indirect control combat.
Mm-hmm.
You're setting up party members' behavior. You're setting up your own characters' tasks, and you're kind of then managing things as it goes. So you might want to pull a healer away from combat to start healing people. You might want to get your spellcaster buffing people, that kind of thing. So there is a lot of management going on in combat, and it didn't bother me with the dice rolls in this, I have to say, but it is kind of a different thing to most of what RPG combat is nowadays, where RPG elements have kind of crept into a lot of different games.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very much, no, this is RPG combat. This is not an RPG with shooter combat or an RPG with melee combat. This is RPG combat. This
This
is
is
your,
Dungeons and Dragons
it's absolutely
combat
Dungeons and Dragons. And
dice.
combat in a tabletop game, again, I have never played a tabletop game. That's a weird, it feels like a weird, I feel like I should be the sort of person who has. I just haven't. It's not something, it's something I have a really weird relationship with conceptually, and I've never really taken that leap to ever try it. But from what I've seen of people who put really cool campaigns up online to watch, from what talking to people who do play these sorts of tabletop RPG games, combat is, it's a discussion. It's a group
Yeah.
of people sitting down and creating a cool moment through a certain amount of chance, a certain amount of design, a certain amount of I'm going to try and do this, but then people around the table or the dice or the story is going to push back against me, and it's that yes and aspect to like drama and acting and that sort of thing, to improv in that way. And this game definitely throws up moments like that for me. But I will not, I will absolutely not deny that there are times where, as I say, it looks an awful lot like a bunch of people standing around swinging brooms at one another and just hitting thin air. And it's like, what are we doing here? This is weird. It doesn't feel, it's not dynamic in that way. It's not dynamic in the moment to moment. It's dynamic in terms of it throws up stuff that's weird and cool. And, instances where you're trying to attack someone, then a trap goes off and chaos breaks loose, and that sort of stuff happens. So from that point of
Chaos.
view, I found, yeah, the chaos, the overall chaos of the combat was the thing that I really liked.
Okay.
Have it,
See, the
yeah, go
overall
ahead.
chaos of the combat is not something that I enjoyed
Okay.
because, you can talk about the combat
Mm.
and people will say that there's a great depth to this combat
Yeah.
because you can use positioning to strategically attack your opponents. This probably comes
Mm.
into play more in the higher difficulty levels where you're forced to do
Yeah.
that and people engage with that and enjoy it. But there's a lot of ways to play this game because of the real time with pause. There's an
Yeah.
auto pause menu where you can go in there and say, okay, game, I want you to automatically pause anytime one of these 20 different situations happens. When My target is gone. Pause. At the end of a combat round, pause. Combat rounds are behind the scenes. It takes like a few seconds, and attacks either take a combat round or like to cast a spell takes a couple of combat rounds, whatever it is.
Mm.
When I get hit, pause. When I get attacked, pause. When I kill someone, pause.
Mm.
When we spot an enemy, pause. So you can choose how many
Yeah.
times the game is going to pause to give you the opportunity to change what you want to do with each of your 6 characters that you have to either select as a group and command or select separately and command. And everyone has so many different options when it comes to their weapons, their spells, their skills, where they can stand, whatever. So you can play it with a lot of pausing, or you can play it 100% real time. And I have to think that that changes a lot of the experience and a lot of the feel
Mm.
for what type of game this is. Because even though we talked about this being a digital implementation of a tabletop game, to me, as someone who has played lots of tabletop RPGs or has played many hours worth of a tabletop RPG, whatever, to me, something that feels the most like a tabletop RPG would be a turn-based
Yeah.
tactics RPG.
Yeah.
Like Final
Yeah.
Fantasy
Completely.
Tactics feels more
Yeah.
like a tabletop RPG to me,
Yeah.
because this is a slow pace, and it's slowed down by a lot of that RNG and missing and stuff,
Mm.
but the pace of a tabletop RPG is slow at its core because you're
Yeah.
taking one turn, seeing what happens as a result of that turn, and then moving on. And you're not having to follow a constant vomit of text telling you what's happening that you can't
Yeah.
really see because the animation doesn't reflect what's happening. The
Yeah.
animation
No.
is kind of
Completely.
generic. They're just
Mm-hmm.
attacking each
Mm-hmm.
other. When someone gets hit and killed, maybe they explode into gory bits. But otherwise, you see, oh, my health went down. I must have
Yeah.
gotten hit. But who hit me? But who even is that? Where are they? Because there's a blob of 6 of my characters and 5 of the enemy characters, and they're all bunched up together.
Yeah.
So you don't really see a lot of what's happening. So if you want to be fully aware of the process, you have to pause a lot. But not much happens in this game where pausing is practical, because you're just pausing. It'll say you were attacked and missed. Pause. Oh, it's the end of a combat round. Pause. Nothing has happened, and you've now paused 10 times. So
Yeah.
I ended up just lowering the difficulty so I didn't have to worry about managing this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because the management of it wasn't fitting what felt right to me. And
Yeah.
instead, I opted to just make it so I didn't have to manage it all, and I could just let it flow in real time and move on through the story, because I think I preferred the idea of exploring the world and moving to new locations and seeing new things that were going to happen
Yeah.
in my adventure. That's where
Yeah.
I kind of came through on combat.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that
So
resonates at all.
no, no, I absolutely get what you mean. I think it's interesting when you said there was an option to pause at end of combat round. I assumed that that would make it feel more like a tabletop game. Where yeah, I think the thing that if you equate this to combat in a tabletop RPG, it would be everyone shouting what they want to do and rolling dice at
Mm-hmm.
the same
Yeah.
time over one another, and then just
Exactly.
and of course the game engine, the Infinity engine, can cope with that because
Yeah.
it's just queuing everything up and operating so quickly. But I just imagine the poor GM as everyone shouted out what they wanted to do, including, by the way, the orcs and the goblins and everything that are on
Mm-hmm.
the other side are all shouting at the same time, and it wouldn't really work. So it's interesting that you seems like you feels like you didn't find a way to make this more like a turn-based game, so that pause didn't necessarily help with that in the way that I assumed it would.
Yeah, I never really found that
Yeah.
balance point.
Mm, mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
But did you
Yeah.
find it easy to direct the action and to follow the action? And did you find it fun to do combat, or were you looking mostly past the combat to the other elements of the game?
So for the first 20% of the game, I was wandering into random encounters that I just got wiped out. And then my
Oh
response to
no.
that was reload and just go around. I just don't want to go near where those animals, those enemies, whatever they are, happen to be. And then as I got a full party and got them equipped and started leveling up, I started to feel like, okay, there's not really much now in the areas that I'm encountering them and in the story that I feel like I'm completely overwhelmed by until the last 20% of the game. So by and large, I found, so the other thing you can do is you can set your party, each individual member's AI routines, which is really in depth and complex. You can also set
That could be really helpful, though.
Yeah, no, completely, absolutely, especially for ranged characters who you don't want going into battle. If you set them to be ranged priority, they will stay at range unless they run out of ammo, essentially. But it's really in depth. It really is. Like they will be ranged until they run out of arrows or sling bullets or whatever, and then they will take out their melee weapon if you've given them one, and they will go within melee range. It's multi-tiered in that respect. But the other aspect of that is you've got formations for your party, like combat formations. And so what I found was once I'd got my party in formation where I had my main character who used a bow, I had generally my rogue was using a bow or a ranged weapon of some kind, and then my spellcaster was using ranged, and then I had a fighter who was kind of set up as a tank, I guess two fighters, and so the character I used as my healer was Jahira, who I think is a fighter druid dual class. I think that's
druid.
right. And so not the best healer, but it worked. And she would go in, but she was quite squishy, so I would have to be managing her a lot in combat, where she would get into trouble quite quickly. For some reason, she seemed to get enemy aggro a bit more than the other two.
I found she died a lot for me.
Yeah, I had
She
to
would
kind
like
of
take big hits.
Yeah, I had to kind of leave her in place until she dropped to maybe half or third health, and then kind of move her out. And what I found a lot of the time was the enemy that the three of them, the two more tanky characters and her, were focused on, would be suddenly pulled by her moving, so it was clearly focused on her, and it was kind of like kiting her around the environment while the ranged characters and the other two melee characters kind of dealt with them. It was weird. There was a lot of micromanagement, and it was a lot of silly kind of, it would be comedy if you actually replayed that combat scenario. Exactly, yeah, a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I found I could get by with it, is what I'll say, with the combat. It definitely wasn't my favorite aspect of the game, but it was only really that last 20% where I thought, am I either way underleveled for this or just destined to really struggle? There weren't many times where I thought I could outsmart a combat scenario, which was a little bit disappointing. One big thing I've heard about Baldur's Gate 3 is, you can be in a conversation where it's clear a fight is going to start, and you can start maneuvering your party members into position, or, you can sneak up behind an enemy and steal their weapons before that. You can get creative with it. I didn't feel I could get creative with the combat in the same way that I have been encouraged to feel like more modern CRPGs allow. And I also, so my character didn't have a lot of charisma. I don't know. I never felt like I was missing out on opportunities to circumvent combat by having.
I don't think there were. Because I had a high charisma.
Right.
Because from my Fallout experience, I know that charisma is like everything in the Black Isle games, the Black Isle developed games.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, let me just make sure I have charisma. But I never really had the option to avoid conflict as much as I would like to.
So that's how it felt to me, definitely, as well, was if I gave an answer and it immediately started combat, I'd be like, okay, maybe there was another answer that I was kind of eyeing up. Let's go and see what happens there. A lot of the time it felt like it just delayed getting into combat by a conversation beat or two. It never really helped me get out of combat altogether. And that was a little bit disappointing, I have to say. I didn't feel like there was as much flexibility there. It still felt like a really in-depth flexible game overall, but it felt like, no, they've kind of set up these ambushes, and whether I try and kid them that I'm not who they think I am, because a lot of times at particular story moments, an assassin will just turn up and say, I know who you are, I'm here to kill you. And I never felt like there was the opportunity to actually convince them otherwise or get out of that.
Yeah.
It just felt like combat was being thrown at me, and that was the way I was going to have to play the game. So I didn't end up leaning into charisma that much.
Felt like there were just different ways of characterizing your character in your own
Yeah.
head
Yeah.
as opposed to in the game world.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree with that.
Okay, so if it wasn't the combat that was your favorite thing, and it doesn't sound like it was the conversational system, was it the broader story, or was it the exploration of the world? What was it?
Yeah, I'd say the three things I liked about this game are all overlap quite a bit. The first is exploration. I am a sucker for exploration in a game. If I can wander around, open up a map, particularly the way you're kind of like opening up the fog of war on each area and seeing what's there, and then doing that on the overall world map as well, like suddenly unlocking a new place you can go to. So exploration was a huge part of it for me.
So were you doing a lot of detailed exploration of the individual areas, getting the entire fog dispersed, seeing every corner and every side of each square place, and picking out different things that might be interactable within each area, rather than kind of going through it to get to your next destination per the NPC suggestion that you most recently heard?
Yeah, a mixture. I started to get a feel partway into the game of the maps that were there, or the areas that were on the map, as main missions. Like the mines, you go to the Nashkel mines, that's a main mission that you're going to. There's not that much else to find on that map than the mines. And other areas that were there to be explored. It felt like there was a bit of a delineation of that. And so where was it? There was a couple of the enemy bases have separate kind of map areas, and you would go to them and you'd start navigating around the edges and realize there's nothing here. I just need to find my way into the mines is one. So in between going to Nashkel Mines and going to Baldur's Gate, there's another enemy base you have to go to.
Before Baldur's Gate.
It must have been. Yeah, it must have been.
Then
Cloakwood.
There's the bandit camp before that, over in those two towns. You can get there. You can get there a couple of ways, actually.
Yeah, and so Cloakwood was one where Cloakwood had a lot of space to explore. But when you get onto that final screen where you're actually going to the kind of enemy hideout that's there, that final screen is just walk straight into the enemy hold. There's nothing else on that screen. So it would vary. And I definitely had a couple of instances of trying to uncover all of the fog of war and then realizing there's nothing here except the thing that I found 10 seconds into arriving in the area, which was a little disappointing. But for the most part, some of those, especially some of the bigger areas, the exploration. And that leads into the second thing that I really liked, was not so much the conversations, but the random encounters you would find out in the world. One that I made a note of. So the first thing I'll say about it is when you first leave Gorion and you're out on your own in the area, seeing wildlife around and it not being immediately hostile
just like
is so
squirrels,
cool. Yeah,
whatever else.
Squirrels, the bears. Like, I had a couple of bears get aggroed by me, but for the most part, you could walk right past a bear and they just would chill. And that's really, really cool. Now, I could argue that wolves would probably behave like that. And why are wolves in games always hostile? They always are. But that's the nature of this type of fantasy world, is wolves come in tiers. They're all going to be hostile. And, you're going to have to say a little apology to the god of dogs every time you end up having to kill a wolf. But that's a bugbear of mine, that wolves always seem to be marked as evil in some way, shape, or form, or at least hostile.
I agree with you.
But yeah, seeing the wildlife and realizing that wasn't there for you to farm, because almost all of the animals don't drop anything, so there's no farming them, grinding, hunting to to get things from them. They're just there to make it feel like an alive world. That's really cool. I bumped into a guy relatively early on, probably 10, 15 hours into the game, Lord Foreshadow. I just was waiting to hear what he had to say. And he mentions that he's been to Neverwinter previously, and really enjoyed his escapades there or whatever, and says he's going to go back there again next year or something like that, he says, which is just a reference to, so it's not Neverwinter Nights and Neverwinter Nights 2, it's the original Neverwinter Nights, and then Neverwinter Nights that was scheduled to come the year later. It ended up being a few years later. And that was just one of those. I haven't played the games, but there was stuff. It felt like there was stuff like that for people who did know D&D, who had played all of these games, just to pick up on all the time. And coming across stuff like that, yeah, it's a little thing, but it just made the world feel alive. That you could bump into someone who didn't really have anything for you; they just had a conversation with you, and then were on their way. That was really cool. And the last bit is the humor that comes from that. There was just some characters. There were barks going off all the time. I just found really, really funny. I thought, I think it comes from a game that has so much writing in it. You can't help but come across some stuff that is not unintentionally funny, but yes, there is that, but intentionally funny. You know, it's meant to be a little bit daft, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Some of the voice acting and the accents they've chosen for certain characters are just funny. It's clearly just meant to bring a smile. There's no way
it's like a little bit of relief in the midst of something
completely.
a little bit more oppressive. It seems like they just throw those things in, like, okay, we'll throw you a little funny stuff here so you can relax a little.
Yeah, absolutely. So those were my favorite things: exploring the environment, then the kind of surprise things you would find, and the humor that came out of a lot of that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Did you find in your exploration, so there's like two parts of exploration, right? What we were talking about when you're actually physically on the screen, and then there's opening up new areas of the map, which I love that map. I think it's so cool the way that you can leave each individual area, whether it's north, south, east, or west, and then it'll make a new area show up on the map when you get out of there that you can now access. That's pretty cool. I like that. But when you were in those individual areas, did you feel like it took like 5 times longer than it should? Like, I mean, I know earlier you were saying that in a lot of games they make you walk too fast, but in this one, I honestly felt like it was laboriously slow. Like just leaving the friendly arm in, for example, to go somewhere else, walking across the whole area, or anywhere where you're in a location kind of in the middle of the area and you have to get to the edge just to leave, I would be like, okay, I'll click this and now I'll do something else in life. I'll watch a little half an episode of a TV show while my person's walking to the edge of the screen.
Yeah. So
that was rough.
No, it absolutely is, and there's no way around that. Especially when I went to the trouble of opening up the whole of the area, you know, uncovering all the fog of war, going all around the outside, finding all the interesting places, and then realizing that I ended up on the opposite side of the map from the place that I knew I needed to go to.
Yeah.
That was very much, I'm just going to click to where I want my characters to go, and I'll stop paying attention unless I hear something that suggests I need to, pay attention. A combat music starting or something like that. But yeah, there's no getting around that. So what I often did was, so movement speed, as far as I could work out, you could get boots that made you move faster. I think it was tied to the weight of armor you were wearing and also the degree of encumbrance your character had. So I found that what I could do was get one character, and it kind of made sense for it to be my main character or my rogue, get them moving as fast as possible, leave the rest of my party behind, use them to do the exploring, saving as I go. And if I ever run into a point where it's like, oh, I should have had the whole party here for this, load the last quick save and then bring everyone along for that. If it was a combat scenario and it was like, oh, this character is going to be in trouble until the rest of my party get here, then I could kind of undo that. But yeah, it was a lot of, right, who's going to be moving quickest here? I'll use them to do this, and then I'll worry about catching the others up once I've
Oh
done
wow.
the exploring and the back and forward. So I found ways around it, but the fact that I had to do that speaks to the problem. Something
Yeah.
like thinking about the older Final Fantasies, where on the screen it's just your character, and
Mm-hmm.
then all the others pop out of your back pocket when the time comes. That's kind of a neat way of doing that. I kind of, particularly for some of the pathing things, it was really nice to see your whole party moving around. But when they got stuck on one another or across a narrow bridge, just like it wasn't quite working. Um, I can see why you end up with a situation where you just have one character representing the whole party.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier, a little less cumbersome, little less like dragging your fishing line through the bottom of the river and hoping that it
Yeah,
comes through
hoping that
okay
yeah.
or whatever. Maybe the story overall we didn't really
Mm,
talk about. It was this orphan story and you're the chosen one. And I didn't finish the game, so I didn't get the
mm.
payoff. But did you find that engaging?
So the the first comment I wrote down was striking start with the storyboards in motion. I quite liked the opening. It was quite a
Mm-hmm.
powerful cinematic opening to the story, set things up. And then the next thing I wrote was an orphan of unknown origin whose parentage obviously won't prove to be important. Why is it always special blood? Like, it's always special blood. It really always is. They have, like, I know we all have that feeling in our lives, like our lives are more, that's a gross exaggeration. That's a broad statement, but a lot of people have the feeling of their lives are more mundane than they feel like they should be. Like we've been sold that our lives are going to be important or special or
Mm-hmm.
interesting, and then the day to day of it is they're not. And so I get why
That's
a
what this
lot
game
of
also said to us.
but I get why a lot of fictional stories go for that, and then you find out actually you're the secret chosen one, special blood, family heritage, superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a prophecy or a future or a destiny or whatever that says that you are more important, and it's got to the point now where that's the thing I think is why is it always special blood? It's always that. And no one seems, not no one, but it's much less common to hear the story of you're a ordinary person in a crap situation, go and make something of it, go and, like, you're gonna have to work with what you've got, and the journey is the point, which is
Mm.
life. I think that's much more like actual life. And so the story kind of started strong and then immediately made me think, oh no. And actually, the fact that you have this unknown heritage, Goriam was raising you for something but protecting you from something, etc., that kind of actually falls to the wayside a little bit. It becomes much more, oh, people are trying to kill me because I'm interfering with the iron plot of the game.
Right, but they were trying to kill me before that. So where did
Yeah,
that
yeah.
go?
And that actually fell a lot by the wayside. Now it turns out, actually, by the end, the person running the iron plot is the one who would have been trying to kill you beforehand, and you're related to them. Of course, you are. And they pay that stuff off. But
Mm.
I just ended up feeling like, no, the plot about this entire section of the world around Baldur's Gate, Faerun, um, being waylaid by this company who are trying desperately to undermine the iron market for their own ends. That's actually a cool story. You're able to go to cool places and interact with people, and you see why people have their own allegiances and their own goals within all of this. That's a simple but a cool plot, and it allows some of the weird side stories, the quirks, the funny stuff I was talking about. It allows that to come out without needing this overarching story of there's a guy somewhere who's trying to become a god and you're the only one who can stop him, which is kind of where the end of the game ends up. That's
Mm.
kind of not necessary. It didn't need to be there, in my opinion. But it also didn't get in the way, I would say. That's how I came out on it. How about yourself?
Um, I was not compelled
Mm,
by the story. I was waiting to see more, to
Mhm.
become more interested. You know, I I was fine going through the beats, oh, you got to go to this mine, you got to go figure out what's going on with these bandits. Oh, you got to go over here.
Mhm.
Um but also I kind of felt like I was just doing whatever the next NPC told me to do
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah.
like, but I mean, that's video games. It just,
Yeah.
in this particular game, I just wasn't being compelled by interest
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
opposed to
A person
being
pointing you in a
required to do
direction
it.
saying the next thing you need to do is over there.
Yeah. I was not compelled by anything from the
Mhm.
side story buffet in this game, nor really from the main quest line. I just followed that because it said to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I think that kind of brings us to a good point to give final thoughts here
Sure.
on Smashing Bricks. We decide with every game whether it was or is worth revisiting in 2025 now and beyond. And if it is, then we call it a smash. And if it's not, well, then it's more of a brick. So, Mr. James Carter, for
Mhm.
Baldur's Gate, Enhanced Edition, I guess, but Baldur's Gate in
Yeah.
general, would you say it's more of a smash or more of a brick, and why? If we didn't already explain it all through the conversation.
It's a weird one. I don't think I could, from my experience, call this a brick. I think I
Mm-hmm.
would have to call it a smash
Mm-hmm.
because it's so clearly the sort of wonderful forebear of a lot of amazing games that we think
Mm-hmm.
about today, and you can see why there was an explosion in the mid to late 90s into the early 2000s, and then that was reignited by something like Dragon Age, and then it's been reignited since by Disco Elysium, and then very, very recently by Baldur's Gate 3.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like those games ever went away in between, but there are amazing peaks in this genre, and I can see why this game at the time in 1998 kind of felt like a bolt of lightning
Yeah.
and sparked so much after it. So I would have to say it's a smash. Would I say it's worth replaying or playing in 2025 for the first time? I think it might be worth giving a try, but if it's from someone who has played a Baldur's Gate 3 or a Disco Elysium, I feel like this is going to pale by comparison.
Mm.
Um, from a gaming history point of view, I think there is interest there, and I think it's worth looking at. But it's not like a wholehearted, everyone must go and play this. It's like if what people have heard today sounds interesting, there's modern versions of this game that overwhelmingly everybody says are an absolute no-brainer as far as playing. Thinking of Baldur's Gate 3.
Mm.
But I think from my time with this, I think this is a cool game. Personally, Planescape Torment spoke to me more, I would say. That's
Mm-hmm.
not to say that I would necessarily give everyone a goal of going to play that either, because they are difficult games to go back to. They're slow, they're plodding, they're a little bit clunky, but they are cool. I think there's something really interesting about taking a complex rule set like this and trying to turn a sociable tabletop game into something digital and dynamic and environmentally interesting to explore. And I think
Mm.
that was really cool.
Okay. I am going to have a little bit of a different take.
Yeah.
It is absolutely, obviously, a special time in gaming history, and it did a lot,
Yeah.
um, as you said. And I can see how in 1998 this must have been everything that some people had hoped for a long time. In 2025,
Mhm.
and based on my experience, I would say that it's gonna be a game that people who are really into it are gonna be very excited about, but they're gonna be a very small sliver of the pie chart that is all gamers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a niche game.
Yeah.
And
Completely.
for me, it didn't really hit. It wasn't firing on all cylinders. It didn't pull me in with the moment to moment
Mm.
gameplay. I enjoyed exploring a little bit, but I didn't enjoy the tedium of how to explore. I enjoyed the concept of the story and moving forward, making progress, finding out what was happening next. But I didn't find that it was told in an incredibly interesting way. I enjoyed the environments themselves, but I didn't really love what was happening in those mostly empty environments. So, for me in 2025, I'm going to have to call this a brick just because it's so specialized and we have come a long way. I'm recognizing that this is essentially like a game for the ages for what it did, but going back to it now, I would say you have better options. Like
Yeah.
I did try Planescape a little bit because it came in that
Mm.
bundle, and I was almost immediately more engaged with it
Mm.
because of the difference in the mechanical systems of interacting with the world and your enemies, and the different way that they did the dialogue and the different quality of writing. I found that the Black Isle way was just more to my taste than the BioWare way. So I would gravitate to that. I would gravitate to Fallout 2, possibly Fallout 1, which I still have yet to go back to. And then some of the newer games, perhaps. I don't know. I haven't played them all, but there are games in this style from the many intervening years. And even Baldur's Gate 2, so I hear, is just an improvement over this one in pretty much every way from what I've read and what I've had friends tell me directly. So I'm going to say no for this one.
Mhm.
Sorry if you're a Baldur's Gate lover out there, and sorry if you think that this makes my opinions bad because just because it's the incorrect opinion based on, the gaming zeitgeist, but that's where I got to land on this one unfortunately. I wasn't dying to come back to it, and I think that's really an important aspect of deciding whether one of these games is a smash or a brick. However, I will say that I do want to tinker around in it some more. I just don't know that I'm enthusiastically jumping back in. I'm going back out of curiosity versus enthusiasm, which is an
Yeah.
important distinction for me when exploring a game. Definitely more curiosity than enthusiasm here.
Yeah.
So, with that, we have a smash and a brick. That makes Baldur's Gate a question block. That leaves it up to you, dear listener. I think you might know if this is for you. You might not. Like I was a tabletop RPG player, and when I saw this, I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, I'm in the mood for this. I'm super excited to see how this goes," and it just didn't land the way that I expected it to. So it is a question block. We do have one listener commentary I'm going to read real quick from Jake, Bugcatcher Jake, one of our newest Patreon supporters. And Jake says, Baldur's Gate 1 is a legend that is showing some of its age. I didn't play until 2023, and there were several things that I really loved. The party members have their own goals and side quests, which helps flesh out the world and the party. I like that the game has systems for reputation that will eventually prevent evil or good party members from staying part of the group. The system itself is a bit clunky, but it's a great idea. The story for the game, after the exciting opening, is painfully slow, with several hours passing before any new major developments. I found it really interesting that a great deal of the story is delivered in letters, journals, and other written things in the world rather than dialogue. I think the story is fine, but character and exploration is where the game shines. There is so much to see, and the world feels expansive and dangerous in a way that I miss in modern games. Enemies are the level that they are, and if you wander into the wrong area, your team will get wrecked. A final note for the gameplay: D&D 2.0 is clunky, but converted over pretty well to this format. I like the pause/active fighting style of gameplay that this game brought to prominence. Once you get used to it, it really works and can lend itself to great tactics in fights. Overall, I liked, but didn't love Baldur's Gate 1. It is a much more hardcore RPG now, but I think if a difficulty curve and slower story are okay for you, it's worth playing today. Smash, if not resounding smash. Thanks, Jake. That was really well thought out.
Yeah.
And he was kind of between a lot of the thoughts that we had, I think. Kind of
Yeah,
landed on
definitely.
some
Yeah.
of them similar, some of them different, but
Mm-hmm.
he also said that the exploration kind of is the highlight,
Yeah.
and that the D&D
Yeah, I agree with that.
2.0 is the low light.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for listening and playing along with us if you did. And I'd like to ask that everybody do one thing for me this time around. Just share one episode, one really good episode of this podcast that you like. Share it on a social media platform. And if you tag Smashing Bricks on whatever platform it is, I will figure out a way to give you some sort of something. I don't know. If I see a tag sharing an episode and you are not a co-host, um, I'll reach out to you somehow. You can also go and give us a review on any of the podcasting platforms. And of course, you can go to patreon.smashingbricks.com and become a patron for as little as $1 a month. $5 tier will get you bonus episodes every month, which are super fun. We're about to talk about Western RPGs next. And there are some other great perks. You can also get Tanuki level supporter recognition every single month, like Ms. Muzo is getting right now. Thanks, Ms. Muzo. Also, check out our Discord server, discord.smashingbricks.com, or you can find it in the notes. And you can go over there, it's free. Get the app on your phone or just log in on the computer, whatever, and just talk about anything, whatever you want. So do that. And as for next episode, I will be joined once again by Anthony Labella, and we will be playing EVO, Search for Eden, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So get your hands on a copy of that, play through, send in your thoughts, and join us next time on Smashing Bricks. That wraps it up for today. I'm still Eddie Inzauto. That is James Carter. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you.